Global Rights, in partnership with the Integrated Social Development Center, held a one-day high-level policy pre-conference on inequality and natural resource management in the ECOWAS region to address the role that natural resources management play in reducing inequality in the country. Nwadishi Faith, the Executive Director, Center for Transparency Advocacy, said despite Nigeria blessed with natural resources, the country is still poor and its impact is more on women and children.
We're so blessed, yet we are so poor. Why? Why the disparity? And the impact is more on women. Every time you talk about resources, natural resources, it's exploitation. You see inequalities and all of the indicators of inequalities more on the people who are closer to the resources. So you find those who are far away from the resources being the major beneficiaries, while those who are closer to the resources are not benefiting, and a majority of these are women. When we talk about women, people think that we are overemphasizing these issues, but that's the reality of the day. Security issues are there. It didn't take the front line because ordinary people like you and I were the ones who were being kidnapped. And just yesterday we saw members of the National Assembly who had sat down and collected allowances, coming out to sing all we are saying, Buhari must go. 6 months to his leaving. How long will it take to do that? Because now insecurity is knocking at their doors. And that's why they are doing that. And just yesterday we heard that over $1 billion have been taken away from our SS Crude account to support the fight against the same insecurity.
Tengi George, a senior officer of Natural Resource Governance Institute, stated that the corrective steps need to be taken to tackle corruption existing in the system, as in the next 10 years, resources from oil will be reduced.
There is a huge elephant that is facing Nigeria at the moment, as well as African countries, that is not being considered even enough. In the next 10 years to 15 years, this resource from oil will have its demand depressing. What does that mean? It means that the revenue that we get, that we're saying is not enough now to service our debts, will reduce even further. How is the government trying to find ways to restore that, to ensure that those revenues potentially are being restored, if right now we're already in trouble?
The Executive Director, Center for LSD, Mr. Monday Osasha, said the place of residence of women are one of those factors that limit them to enjoy certain privilege, which expand inequality gap.
When we talk about inequality, we're essentially talking about injustice. We are talking of inequity, unequalness, even in the distribution of opportunities that exist in the extractive sector. The women are the worst hit, because if you want to measure vulnerability, the main people that you really talk about are women and children. And we have seen over the years that even though all of us have been talking about the Sustainable Development Goals that has the overarching mantra of leaving no one behind, we have seen, especially from our client, that the women folk has been left behind. And they have been left behind by way of discrimination. They have been left behind by way of their socioeconomic status. They have been left behind because of their place of residence.
Dr. Becker, an assistant director with NESRA, said there should be a rule of law that will combat corruption within the system and regulatory bodies.
One of the hallmarks of good governance is that institutions that actually protect human rights and which environmental rights are actually part of human rights, by the way, must be strengthened. They must be able to do their jobs properly. They must have the tools, the right training, whatever they need to be able to carry out these things. There has to be rule of law too. We can't actually do things that, okay, this person is untouchable, that person is touchable, that kind of thing. So there has to be rule of law. We have to combat corruption within the system. Regulatory agencies are also known to have problems with corruption, and so that has to be dealt with. And then we have to actually look at what we do as service to Nigerians.
Abiodun Bayewu, the executive director of Global Rights, stated that the poverty level is high due to the issue of mismanagement of the country's resources, and urged that power be put in the hands of the ordinary people to choose what happens to their resources.
This is towards a larger meeting of issues of inequality and extractives in West Africa. As you know, that Nigeria is one of the richest resource countries in the world, and yet that our poverty levels are extremely high, that it's not translating to wealth for citizens, and the gap, the inequality gaps are just too wide. Some of the issues that have been identified, of course, are the mismanagement of natural resources, conflicting policies by governments, the failure to look at the impact of climate change on natural resource governance, state capture continues. State capture, impunity, and corruption continue to be a resounding theme around these issues, and so that we also just need to look at these issues and think about how to deal with these issues effectively.
Obiageli Onora, the acting director, Communication Stakeholders Management, said the social development goal is aimed at reducing inequality by managing the country's resources.
We are looking at inequalities in natural resource management, or if I may put it the other way, the natural resource management and inequalities in West Africa region. We're asking ourselves that question. Does natural resource governance promote or facilitate inequality? And then you can also look at it the other way. If it does, how can you also use natural resource governance to address inequalities in our socioeconomic lives? And so, if you're able to answer these two questions, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals 10, is talking about reducing inequality. And while I was making my remarks earlier, I said if you look at the SDG 6, if you look at the SDG 4, if you look at the SDG 12, all of them seem to be linked to addressing or reducing the SDG 10, which is reducing inequality. So, using natural resource governance or managing our natural resources revenues efficiently, how can we use that tool? How can we use this very resource to reduce inequality, the inequality of income disparity, the inequality of gender inclusion or exclusion, the inequality of beneficiation or benefit sharing at the community level? How can you use the natural resource governance to reduce these inequalities, particularly when it comes to those who are supposed to be benefiting from our natural resources? That's the essence of this pre-conference. And if you follow the conversation, you could see that people are already asking, the issue about inequality is so wide. So how do you tailor it to ensure that you get the desired outcome at the end of the day? And so that's why we narrowed into using natural resource governance to reduce inequalities.
Dorcas Olariwaju, Voicetv, Nigeria.